The unexpected moment, the hall was packed. Every seat was taken, and even the aisles were crowded with people standing, waiting for something rare. There were lights above, cameras ready, and whispers moving like waves across the room. No one expected what was about to happen. The host walked on stage and smiled, but his words carried more weight than anyone thought. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Keanu Reeves." The crowd cheered so loudly that it shook the walls. People clapped, screamed, and some even cried. Keanu walked in calmly, his steps slow, his face soft, his suit simple. He lifted his hand just a little to greet. Not too high, not too proud. The crowd felt it. This man carried no arrogance. Then something happened that no one expected. The host paused. His smile grew wider and he said, "And joining him tonight, a legend of martial arts, Steven Seagal." The entire hall froze. Silence filled the air for a moment, like everyone had stopped breathing. Then gasps broke out, followed by applause. Some were shocked, some whispered, "Is this real?" Keanu looked to the side as Steven Seagal walked slowly onto the stage. His presence was strong, almost heavy, like the weight of years of discipline followed him. He had lived a long life of training, movies, and battles of his own spirit. Some people admired him, some doubted him, but none could ignore him. Two men, so different yet so powerful, stood on one stage together. One carried the calm of humility, the other the fire of discipline. The crowd had no idea if they would shake hands, speak, or even face each other. For a moment, it was tense. Steven's eyes were sharp, steady. Keanu's eyes were soft, searching. People whispered, "Will they respect each other?" Then Steven raised his hand first. He offered it forward, not in arrogance, but in respect. The hall held its breath. Keanu looked at him, gave a small smile, and shook his hand. The entire room exploded in cheers. Cameras flashed, and the sound of clapping echoed like thunder. But under that handshake was something deeper. Two men who had lived different lives, one filled with silence and kindness, the other with battles and hard lessons, shared a moment of unity. Keanu leaned closer and said something the microphone did not catch. Steven's expression softened, and for the first time that evening, he gave a small nod, almost like a bow. The crowd did not know what was said, but they felt the energy. Something had shifted. It was not just two actors or two fighters on stage. It was a reminder that even strong men, even men with pride and history, can meet with respect. This was only the beginning. No one knew that the night would soon reveal moments of conflict, emotion, and lessons that would leave the hall silent in shock and awe. Silence before the storm after. The first shock of the handshake. The crowd settled, but the air was still thick with tension. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting for what would happen next. Keanu stood calmly, his eyes scanning the audience, while Steven remained firm, his shoulders straight, his face serious. The host stepped back, almost afraid to interrupt, and for a long moment the two men just stood side by side. The silence was powerful, louder than the cheers had been. Then Keanu spoke first. His voice was soft, almost humble, yet it carried across the hall. He said, "Tonight is not about me, and it is not about him. Tonight is about learning what respect really means." The crowd murmured, surprised. Keanu's words were simple, but they felt heavy, like they came from a man who had lived through loss, pain, and kindness. Steven looked at him, his jaw tight, but then he nodded. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, more forceful, but filled with control. "Respect," he said, "is earned through struggle, through mistakes, and through discipline." The hall grew quiet again. Both men had spoken, and yet their meanings were different. Keanu spoke of respect as kindness. Steven spoke of respect as strength. The people could feel a storm coming. The host finally found his courage. "Gentlemen," he said, "everyone here is waiting to hear you both. Will you share your stories?" Keanu turned to the audience and began. He told them about his early life, about the challenges he faced as a child, losing his father, moving from place to place, and learning to survive in silence. He shared how acting was never about fame for him, but about connection. "I never wanted to be the loudest person in the room," he said. "I wanted to be the one who made others feel less alone." Some people in the crowd wiped their eyes. His words were raw, filled with humility. When he finished, Stephen stepped forward. His story was different. He spoke of training, of pain, of days and nights spent mastering martial arts in Japan. He told of being challenged, mocked, and pushed to the edge, but never giving up. Discipline, he said, is what keeps a man standing when the world wants him to fall. The crowd listened carefully. Some nodded, others frowned. Both stories were powerful, but they carried different truths. Then came the twist. A voice from the audience shouted, "So whose way is right?" The hall gasped. It was a bold question, and for a moment, both men looked at each other. Keanu gave a small smile. "Maybe both are right," he said, but Stephen shook his head slowly. "Or maybe both are incomplete," he replied. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. It was no longer just about respect. It was about conflict, about two ways of life standing face to face. The crowd could sense it. Something was coming. Something that would test both men in front of everyone. The challenge, the hall was buzzing after Stephen's words. Maybe both are incomplete, he had said, and those words echoed in everyone's mind. People whispered to each other, unsure what was about to happen. The host tried to calm the mood, but the energy had shifted. It was no longer just a meeting of two legends. It felt like a test, a moment that could break or unite. Stephen turned toward Keanu. His face was serious, his eyes sharp. "Words are easy," he said. "But truth is proven through action," the audience gasped. It sounded almost like a challenge. Keanu, however, did not look angry. He stood still, his calm presence like water against fire. He smiled faintly and replied, "Then let our action be respect, not ego." The crowd clapped at his answer, but Stephen did not step back. He raised his hand slightly, motioning to the open space of the stage. "Show them," he said. Not with anger. With honesty. The host panicked. "Gentlemen, this is not planned," he said, his voice trembling. But the crowd had already grown restless, their excitement rising. They wanted to see what would happen. Keanu hesitated for a moment. Then, in a voice that was soft yet firm, he said, "If this helps people understand respect, then I will." The hall erupted with cheers. People stood from their seats, holding up phones, waiting to capture history. Stephen removed his jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it aside. His movements were sharp, controlled, like a man who had practiced 1,000 times. The audience felt the tension grow stronger. Keanu did not rush. He stepped forward, bowed slightly to Stephen, and said, "No matter what happens, I honor you." The crowd grew silent. The bow was simple, but it carried weight. Even Stephen, with all his pride, nodded in return. They faced each other in the center of the stage, not as actors, not as celebrities, but as men, each carrying their own truth about respect. The first movement came from Stephen. Swift, precise, his arm cut through the air in a controlled strike, meant not to harm, but to test. Keanu reacted with grace, stepping aside, his hand moving gently to guide the strike away. The crowd gasped. It was not a fight. It was a dance of discipline and calm. Strike after strike, block after block, the two men moved. Stephen's power was forceful, sharp, like a storm. Keanu's responses were soft, fluid, like water. Together, they created something no one expected. The audience grew silent, every eye fixed on the stage. Some held their breath, others whispered, "This is not fighting. This is something else." Then it happened. In the middle of the exchange, Keanu stepped back and lowered his hands. He refused to strike back. The hall froze. "Why stop?" Stephen asked, his voice steady. Keanu looked at him with kindness. "Because respect is not about winning. It is about seeing each other clearly." The words hit harder than any strike. The crowd clapped. Some even stood, their eyes shining with emotion. Stephen stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he lowered his stance. His face softened, his shoulders relaxed. For the first time that night, Stephen smiled. Not the smile of arrogance, but the smile of a man who had found understanding. The voice that shook the hall. The hall was filled with thunderous applause after Stephen lowered his stance and Keanu's words echoed across the room. People thought they had seen the peak of the night. Two legends had shown respect without pride, and hearts were touched. But just when the calm was settling, a voice rose from the back of the hall. It was not gentle, not supportive. It was sharp, filled with doubt. "This is fake," the voice shouted. The entire audience turned. Whispers rippled like fire. The mood that had been full of respect suddenly grew tense again. A man stood tall, his face red with anger. "You talk about respect, but you live in comfort. You speak of struggle, but you are rich, famous, and safe. What do you know of real pain? What do you know of fighting for survival?" His words cut through the air like a blade. Some people in the crowd nodded slowly, as if the question was buried in their own hearts too. Others frowned, wanting the moment of peace to last. Keanu did not flinch. He looked at the man, his eyes calm, and said, "Pain does not look the same for everyone, but it teaches us all. I lost people I loved. I walked through days of loneliness. I know what it means to live with silence." The hall grew quiet. His words touched many. But the man was not convinced. He turned his glare towards Stephen. "And you," he shouted, "you talk about discipline, but you lived in fame. How do you understand the struggle of ordinary people who fight every day just to eat, just to stand, just to breathe?" Stephen's eyes hardened, but not with anger. He stepped forward, his voice deep and heavy. "You are right," he said. "I had fame. I had privilege. But I also know nights when my body broke, when my pride fell, when I was nothing but a man trying to survive another day. You cannot judge the weight of a man's soul by the shine of his stage." The crowd listened, torn between doubt and respect. Then Keanu did something no one expected. He walked toward the man who had shouted. Step by step, without security, without fear, he closed the distance. The cameras tried to follow, but the lights felt dimmer as the hall held its breath. When he reached the man, Keanu looked into his eyes. "You are angry because you have lived through pain," he said softly. "But do not let pain turn into hate. Hate only builds more walls. Respect breaks them." The man's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His anger began to melt into something else, something he had buried for years. Stephen joined them. He placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder. "Strength is not about crushing others," he said. "It is about standing tall so you can lift others." The man's eyes filled with tears. The hall, silent as stone, watched as his anger turned into silence, then into a broken sigh. In that moment, something shifted in the audience. People no longer saw just two stars on stage. They saw two men who carried pain, who understood struggle, who showed that respect and kindness were not words for the privileged, but truths for all. The applause that followed was not wild. It was slow, steady, powerful, like the sound of hearts opening one by one. The breaking point, the hall was still vibrating with the slow, steady applause when the lights flickered. At first, people thought it was a technical problem, but then the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from behind the stage. The host froze, unsure of what was happening. The audience turned, restless, their whispers rising again. And then, without warning, a group of young men walked forward. They were not part of the show, not part of the security. Their faces were hard, filled with anger. The leader stepped up, pointing his finger at Keanu and Stephen. "Words are useless," he shouted. "You speak of respect, but the world is broken. People like us suffer every day, while people like you stand on stage and pretend you understand." The hall gasped. Security rushed forward, but the leader raised his hand. "Don't stop us. If they want to prove respect, let them face real pain, not just stories." Keanu and Stephen exchanged a look. The crowd's excitement had turned into fear. No one knew what was about to happen. Stephen stepped forward first. His voice was strong. "You think violence will prove your struggle? Violence only repeats the same pain you want to escape." The young man laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say. You never had to choose between food and pride. You never had to watch your family suffer because no one cared." The words were sharp, heavy with truth. The hall grew silent, every person feeling the weight. Keanu's voice then rose, soft but steady. "You are right. The world is unfair. People suffer while others watch. But respect and kindness are not lies. They are the only way to heal. Hate will only destroy what little we still have." The young men hesitated, but the leader still burned with anger. "Then prove it. Prove your respect not with speeches, but with action." The crowd held its breath. Was this going to turn into chaos? Stephen took off his watch and placed it on the ground. "If you want to strike, strike me first," he said. But know this, your anger will not make you free. Only discipline will. The leader's hand trembled. He clenched his fist, ready to strike. The hall screamed, "No!" But before he could move, Keanu stepped between them. His eyes were calm, filled with kindness, and he whispered just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I see your pain. You are not alone anymore." The leader froze. His fist shook, then slowly dropped. His eyes filled with tears, but his body collapsed under the weight of his own emotions. The other young men rushed to catch him, but their anger had melted into silence. The hall exploded, not in fear but in relief. Cheers and applause filled the room. Strangers hugged each other. Some cried openly. Two men had turned what could have been chaos into a moment of unity. Stephen helped lift the young leader, steadying him on his feet. "You are strong," he said, "but let your strength protect, not destroy." Keanu placed his hand on the man's shoulder. "Your voice matters. Use it to heal, not to harm." The man nodded weakly, tears running down his face, and for the first time, the hall felt something stronger than shock. It felt hope. The final test. The hall was still echoing with relief when the host tried to close the event. He stepped forward, his voice shaking but hopeful. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have seen respect, kindness, and strength. Let us carry these lessons home." The audience clapped, but deep inside, many felt the night was not over. There was still something unfinished, something waiting to break through. Suddenly, a woman's voice rose from the balcony above. Unlike the anger before, her tone was filled with sorrow. "You speak of hope," she cried, "but what about those who are never heard?" The hall turned. She was holding a photograph close to her chest. Her hands shook as tears ran down her face. Keanu looked up, his calm eyes full of empathy. "Please, come down," he said gently. The crowd parted as she slowly walked down the stairs. Her story poured out with every trembling step. "My brother, he believed in respect and kindness, but the world crushed him. He gave, he sacrificed, yet no one stood for him. He died alone, forgotten. Tell me, where was kindness then?" The hall went silent. Her pain cut deeper than anger ever could. It was not a challenge. It was a wound, raw and bleeding. Keanu walked toward her, but his voice cracked slightly, showing his own buried scars. "I have lost, too," he whispered. "People I loved, people who carried light. And yes, it felt like kindness failed. But I learned something. Even when the world is cruel, kindness is never wasted. Every act plants a seed. Sometimes we never see it grow, but it does. Your brother's kindness is not gone. It lives in you and in everyone touched by him." The woman sobbed, her knees shaking. Keanu knelt in front of her, placing his hand gently over hers. The hall was silent except for her cries. Then Stephen, who had stood back, stepped forward. His voice was low but steady, like a teacher who had faced his own regrets. "Discipline is not just about fighting or training. It is about carrying pain without letting it turn us into stone. Your brother's strength was not wasted. It was proof that one man can hold on to light even in darkness, and that is victory." The woman lifted her eyes, meeting both men. In her tears, there was a flicker of healing. The audience was moved beyond words. People cried openly. Strangers reached for each other's hands. The night had become more than an event. It had become a mirror of human struggle, showing the world both its wounds and its hope. And just when the silence felt like it had reached its peak, the woman whispered, "Then promise me. Promise you will keep fighting for kindness so others don't suffer like he did." Keanu stood slowly, his hand over his heart. "I promise," he said. Stephen raised his hand in respect. "I promise too," he added. The hall erupted, not in wild cheers, but in a standing ovation that felt like a wave of love, respect, and unity. The unspoken truth. The standing ovation filled the hall like a living wave. People were on their feet, clapping, crying, and holding their breath between tears. Strangers embraced each other. The atmosphere was no longer about a show, or even about two famous men. It was about humanity itself. Keanu and Stephen stood side by side at the center of the stage. Two men from different worlds, different paths. But in that moment, they carried the same truth. The host's voice was trembling when he tried to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we saw what respect really means. But before we close, is there anything you both want to leave us with? The hall grew silent again. Everyone leaned forward. Keanu took a slow breath. Life gives us pain, he said softly. It gives us loss, loneliness, and challenges we never asked for. But we cannot choose what we lose. We can only choose how we carry it. Kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest choice we can make when the world pushes us down. Respect is not about applause. It is about seeing each person as human, no matter who they are. His words were simple, but they flowed into every heart in the hall. Stephen then stepped forward. His voice was deeper, heavier, yet filled with humility. Discipline is not about pride. It is about control, patience, and the courage to stand when the ground shakes. I have seen arrogance. I have been guilty of it too. But tonight I learned something from him and from all of you. True discipline is not just in the body. It is in the heart. It is the ability to fight without hate, to live with honor, and to bow when kindness is greater than strength. For the first time, the hall saw Stephen's eyes soften, not with anger, not with pride, but with understanding. Keanu turned to him and bowed again. This time, Stephen bowed back. Not as rivals, not as actors, but as men who had found respect in each other. The hall erupted in cheers once more, but this time it was different. It was not wild noise. It was unity. It was love. The woman who had spoken earlier wiped her tears and whispered, "Thank you." The young men who had stormed the stage stood silently, their anger transformed into something new. Even the man who had doubted them earlier sat with his head bowed, his heart opened. The night ended with no music, no fireworks, no grand closing act. Just two men walking off the stage, side by side, their shoulders straight, their eyes calm. The crowd remained standing long after they were gone. No one wanted to leave, because they knew they had witnessed something greater than entertainment. They had witnessed humanity at its highest. Two paths meeting not to fight, but to show the world that respect, humility, resilience, and kindness are not just words, but choices we must live every day. And as the lights dimmed, people carried those choices in their hearts, whispering to each other, "Tonight we saw respect.